my experience working on a prison yard. One thing I learned about inmates that I learned that they didn't know about themselves. Um, and here's my story, my experience with that particular time. Um, I used to work AA and NA programs for the Department of Corrections. So those are classes like you get at nighttime. It's like picking up extra shift. Um, they're called self-help programs. Um, they have a good amount, but for whatever reason, AA and NA, those two programs were always something that I was, given, gravitated towards, however you want to call it. So my first experience, I was on a training, um, and I learned something about, or I picked up something from that conversation, and I used it. Ended up using it in my programs from Saddle State Prison, to Corcoran State Prison, Avenel State Prison, to every prison. I've worked these programs, and I always used it, and it always, always did well. I always was able to um, not so much make a difference, but I was able to use it, and um, and help them see maybe something that they weren't able to see themselves. So um, this particular inmate, he had told me he'd been out 30 years, and he was telling me about the time that he went to parole board, which was at his 25-year mark, and he was telling me that he remembered going in shackled from head to toe, um, sat him down, and at these parole boards they have to, there's the victims' families, or there's a lot of the victims themselves or the victim's family, and they have to hear, they have to hear them talk, and you did this to my family member. You get the picture. On top of that, they get, they get probed with a lot of questions. One, and this inmate he kept telling me, because he kept asking me the same questions over and over again, just in a different form. And to the point where he was like, I already answered that question. Why do you keep asking me that? So he said, they kept asking me these questions, and he goes, I snapped. Like, man, f you guys. I'm screw you guys. I don't want to be here. And he said, I'll never forget it. He goes, CO, big buff CO came, picked him up. He goes, just picked him up and took him out of the room. And then some time went by, and he said that they had asked him if he wanted to come back in, and he said, no, I'm good. I don't want to go back in. So fast forward 5 years later, he goes, man, I was reading my transcripts from that day. He said, I was reading them, and it said, Mr. So and so. He goes, we went through your bad, but you never let us go through your good. He goes, you did a lot of bad here in your time, 25 years. It's a lot of time to do bad. He goes, but you also did a lot of good, and you never let us get to that. I hope next time that we, you have this opportunity, you take it and you do the most with it. And I learned something that day, listening to that inmate story. As a troubled youth heading towards that direction in life, I saw it in myself. What I learned that day was he didn't know how to talk. And throughout my classes, I would always get that. What do you mean he didn't know how to talk? He just got pushed and poked and poked and pushed and pushed and pushed, and he was put up in a corner, and when he was in the corner. He didn't know how to get himself out of it other than to use violence. Um, so when I started my classes, um, level 4 mainline, all lifers, um, very intimidating situation to say the least. Because in this setting, you go grab your attendance sheet, um, and they call them out. You give it to the program. They call them out one by one. Then they line up, and then they get them. They search them, and then from there, you're locked in a room with them. And so I didn't know it at the time, but I had like the head of every big gang in there. But what one thing I can tell you about a mainline is there's a lot of respect. You don't, just because you're in the same room with this individual from opposition, doesn't mean they're gonna just attack each other. There's rules and regulations, and some of the most respectful people I've ever met. Um, so, like I said, I'm in these rooms with them. I'm in this room with them as a chapel, um, and I'm not getting any respect. I'm not getting that. Not getting that anything at all. So, I stand up in front of the class and I tell them this inmate story, and it went from like chattering, like no respect, to like, okay, now I got their attention, because they said, this inmate, he just didn't know how to talk. He didn't know how to verbalize, and he didn't know how to show his emotions with his words. He had to act out. So what you guys need to do is you guys need to learn how to speak in this program. I told them my story. So 6 months old, father stabbed my mom, left her for dead. She made it. Suffice it to say, I've never met my dad. Around 5 years old, I can remember at least 2 drug raids. Foster care for a weekend, which it's not a lot, but you can. I know, I know the difference between my home and not my home, and that place was not my home. But it's a memory that always stuck with me. And at 15, my mom slit her wrist, and getting her to the ER, getting home, cleaning up the blood. Different story for a different day, but 25, having a child, and he was born premature. I was told he was not going to make it through the night. Plan for the funeral. So I've been through some things in life. So I'm a statistic. I should be in here with you. I should be in a prison, not working for one. And by that time, you could hear a pin drop. And I'll go through these stories later on more in depth, but I had used that platform, that situation to let these guys know, hey, don't waste this time. Who's been to board? Have like one person stand up. I said, come up front. And I said, all right, we're gonna make a mock parole board, and I want you guys to ask questions. Ask the same questions that you were asked. I remember I had a big 6'5", 6'7" tall. He was Native American, big guy. And we had him stand up front, and they started asking him questions. And they were simple questions like, where are you gonna live at? Who's gonna, what city are you going to? Who's gonna take care of you? Things like that. And dripping wet, sweating bullets, just drenched. And I stopped him and I was like, "Look, what are they asking you? They're not asking you anything hard." I go, "He just doesn't know how to talk." I go, "Use this time, use this platform, use this class to learn how to get past those fears, that public speaking." And I'm glad and blessed to say that I had a big turnaround. I had that classroom. There was cell phones going off in the classroom. I'm like, oh hell no, there's no way. Um, and but from there, I had one of he was a high rank member of a certain clique in there, and he came up to me and he was like, "Hey, Marin, you're right." He goes, they asked me this, they asked me that, but because we went over it in class, I was able to give an answer. And that's not for their whole parole board. That was just one section, because they're gonna go over everything that they've done. But when they hit their academics, they're gonna see that they took a AA class, and they're gonna be like, "Oh, you took AA? Yeah. What's step number 3?" Things like that. And when I got his, uh, when I got his, testimony or whatever you want to call it, his experience, I asked him to stand up and if he wouldn't mind telling the rest of the class. And I had a great experience after that because they were all into it because they kind of understood. I was letting them know, don't waste this time. Your family's out there. You're in here. Um, who's the quarterback of your team? You're sitting on the sideline right now and they're playing the game without you. So, do you want to be that person or you want to come home? And that was one of my experiences in CDCR. But if you're in CDCR and doing those type of classes, try using that public speaking because, believe it or not, they need the help and they do need. Um, they're not all just animals. They're people. They're humans too. Their mothers or their fathers, their brothers, their uncles, things like that. They're human too. Um, yeah, and especially in a female prison as well. But they still are human, and they still need to be treated as such. And you're gonna hear so many bad things because there are a lot of bad things happen, but you have to understand that's the environment, and it just is what it is. It's called Department of Rehab or it's called Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. That's you know, it's a long shot. Don't get me wrong. It's not. Everybody's gonna just turn at the drop of a dime, but the ones that want to get out, deep down, a lot of them want to get out. They want to go home. But that's just one of my CDCR stories.